Code Geass is a show with a little bit of everything. It's got action, it's got love triangles, or I suppose love squares rather. It's got giant mechs beating up on each other, but more than anything, it has mind-bending twists and incredible character development. Such a show has prompted many fans to analyze the psychological motivations of characters and many other complexities that come with the plot. While I could go on for days about the characters and plot of the show, I want to focus on one aspect that seems largely ignored by the fan base. That is, the music. Code Geass is chock full of fantastic music. The sheer diversity of musical style is incredible. From Zero's theme, which has the sort of flamenco beat woven into it, to a distinctly Irish reel that is only used once, but is very easy to dance traditional steps to. And some music that definitely sounds John Williams inspired. But today, I want to focus on just one track in particular, called Madder Sky. According to Reddit fan forums and its inclusion in many different Code Geass OST compilations, you can see a couple of my favorites linked in the description below, this seems like one of the most popular tracks from the show. What's remarkable about this is it only plays once, in the very last scene of the show. Now before we go any further, I do want to give a spoiler warning. Talking about this track will spoil the entire show for you. If you haven't already seen Code Geass, I highly recommend watching it all the way through R2, which is the second season, before continuing with this video. Okay, now that that's out of the way, if you're still here, let's dive in. Madder Sky is used at the culmination of the Zero Requiem. Lelouch has taken over the world and become the united symbol of hatred, just as he set out to do. Of course, if this is your first time through the show, you don't really understand why he did this. As he parades through Area 11 with his royal cohort, all seems lost, until Zero appears. I love that the creators of the show use the Zero music here. Since Lelouch is on the parade float, we know instantly it's not him in the costume. I feel like using the theme helps to emphasize the importance of Zero as a symbol, rather than an alter ego for Lelouch himself. I also love how they animate Zero running. When he first appears, I thought maybe it was C2, since she has donned the mask before. But as soon as Zero starts running through the soldiers, dodging bullets and jumping over Jeremiah, it's obvious it's Suzaku, since we've seen him move in this way before. Once Zero is holding the sword up to Lelouch, the scene cuts to Suzaku and Lelouch planning the Zero Requiem. In this final reveal of what the heck the two friends have been up to for the past 4 episodes, is the one and only time we hear Madder Sky. The music begins with a simple melody in the horn, accompanied by 5 chords that repeat. The motif in the horn is well equipped to be used as a leitmotif throughout the show, as it is short and simple. The first measure alone could be used as a signal point that builds up to the whole thing in the melody of this scene. How to Train Your Dragon does a great job of this kind of effect, a soundtrack I will definitely talk about in a later video. To me, it almost seems a waste to only use this melody in the final scene. It is incredibly effective as it stands, but it could be equally as effective with associations of dramatic moments earlier in the show. However, I do think the choice of using new music was deliberate, and still very effective. The simple repeating 5-chord progression seems innocent at first, but has a lot of problems from a theoretical standpoint. Based on the single flat key signature and an emphasis on the note D in the melody, and also the fact that we start on a D minor chord, it seems like we should be in D minor. However, there's a problem with how the rest of the chords function in D minor. In Western harmony, chords are given certain functions, namely predominant, dominant, and tonic. If we are in D minor, we know that D minor is the tonic, and A major is the dominant. The dominant is always the major chord beginning on the 5th scale degree. In this case, if we count up 5 notes starting on D, we land on A as number 5. The dominant can also be the chord built on the 7th note of the scale. Normally it is diminished, which is what the little circle means. Both of these chords want to go back to the tonic or 1 chord. This is because of something called the leading tone, which is a half step below tonic. In D minor, that would be C sharp. The leading tone provides an extra pull back to tonic. Take a listen to a theoretically correct chord progression in D minor. Now that your ear is accustomed to D minor, let's listen to the C sharp leading tone resolving to the tonic D in isolation. And now, let's listen to C natural resolving to D. Hopefully, you notice more of a pull from the C sharp to D than from the C natural to D. That is the power of the leading tone. Now, in order to get the major 5 chord and the diminished 7 chord in a minor key, we have to add an accidental to get that leading tone. Matter Sky does not do this. In fact, it stays in what we call natural minor, where only the key signature governs the notes instead of some notes changing to get the leading tone. As you can see from the Matter Sky progression, we have a major 7 chord going to 1 rather than diminished 7. The chord is built on C instead of C sharp, eliminating that leading tone. So we get some of the dominant quality by using a chord built on the 7th scale degree, but without the extra pull of the leading tone. In addition to dominant function, we have something called predominant function. Normally, this would be a diminished 2 chord or a minor 4 chord when we are in a minor key. Predominant chords precede dominant chords, hence the term predominant. With these functions established, the typical ways chords progress in a minor key are shown here. As you can see, the way the chords progress in Matter Sky does not follow what would typically happen in a minor key. Let's listen to that correct chord progression again. Listen for the C sharp to D leading tone pull from the second to last chord into the last chord. Now, listen to the Matter Sky progression in isolation, and hear how different it sounds from the common theoretical way that chords would progress. Since this progression does not sit right theoretically in D minor, that begs the question, is the piece in D minor? We could instead consider it in F major, which also has 1 flat in the key signature, and we can see a movement from C to F, F major's 5 to 1, from the 3rd measure into the 4th. In F major, the full chord progression would be as follows. This is a much more functional chord progression in theory. Consider the typical motion of chords in a major key as shown here. You can see we have a predominant to dominant to tonic function. The dominant then goes to 6, which in Western harmony is a deceptive cadence, meaning it deceives us by going from 5 to 6 instead of 5 to 1. And you can see the arrow going from 5 back to 6, allowing for this function. Now, I purposely said this analysis makes sense in theory because this piece does not sound like it's an F major. It does not sound like it wants to go back to an F chord. In fact, when we land on that D minor chord in measure 5, to me at least, it sounds resolved. This is partly because of the emphasis on D in both the melody and as the first chord we hear. The major 7 is a weak point of return. A diminished 7 would be stronger, but I don't think it would be as impactful for the emotions that the composer, Kotaro Nakagawa, is trying to stir up based on the scene. In fact, music for media tends to play with emotions with these kinds of irregular chord progressions. Based again on the typical functions of chords found throughout Western harmony, including much of modern pop music, our ears get used to the expectations of where chords should go. Our brains are trained to understand the first chord as the key center and any repeated note as important. In this case, that note is D, and that opening chord is D minor. So this is why, despite not theoretically making sense, I think this piece should be considered in D minor. By setting up a minor key followed by 4 major chords, Nakagawa creates this sort of hopeful sadness. Even without the context of the story and the visuals, I felt that vibe when I first heard this track before finishing the show. And of course, in the context of the story, Lelouch is bringing a new start to the world. A new hope, if you will, but he is paying the ultimate price to do so. Hence the hope, but also the sadness. Of course, it is not the chord progression alone that makes this impact. Many musical factors make this piece work so well in this scene. The opening horn solo is accompanied by a choir singing the chords we just talked about. Using a choir adds a sort of human element to the scene, which is incredibly telling, as Lelouch is passing on the symbol of Zero to Suzaku. Although Zero is a symbol, there is still a human behind the mask, a human that has to kill his best friend. This leads into a sort of break that takes us into a march-like, heavily accented pattern in the strings. In the soundtrack version, this break is longer, almost making you hold your breath. In the actual show, the break is shorter, but I think it is just as effective with the timing of Suzaku saying, "That
is the Zero Requiem."
You also have the use of largely brass instruments playing the melody. Brass, particularly the French horn, or just horn, as my horn-playing friends would say, is largely associated with the heroic. You can see this all throughout music in the media, and all the way back into the 19th century with opera, and arguably even earlier. Using a horn emphasizes Lelouch and Suzaku as heroes, flawed though they are. The way the visuals work with the music through the rest of the scene is cinematic mastery. The scene switches effortlessly between the present and the past conversation, while highlighting the reactions of all the main characters to this turn of events. Meanwhile, the music provides a steady build and continuity that ties everything together. What is truly insane to me is how little of the full Matter Sky track is actually used in the show. In the show, the piece cuts before it reaches the incredibly driving ending. Yet, composer Nakagawa still took the time to write out a whole cohesive piece of music. Whether this moment was supposed to be longer initially in the show or not, I have no idea. I also have no idea if the schedule for writing music for anime is as ridiculous as it is for American TV. If so, this soundtrack is even more impressive. But regardless of how much time he had to write it, Nakagawa still deserves an incredible amount of praise for his contributions to making Code Geass so memorable. Now, let's go ahead and watch the whole scene, thinking about all the musical features that work together to create this truly incredible close to an incredible show.
Suzaku, you have to kill me. You must promise.
You're going through with this, no matter what?
As planned, the hatred of the whole world is now focused directly upon me. And now the only thing that remains is to get rid of me and finally break the cycle of hatred. The legend of Zero isn't dead. It lives within the hearts of the Black Knights. Schneisel will serve Zero also. With this, the world will gather not for an exchange of force, but for an exchange of open dialogue around one table. Mankind will be able to move forward into the future.
And that
Yes.
is the Zero Requiem. We both realized it back in C's world. We knew how humanity was longing for the future.
Hey, Suzaku. Geass power is similar to a wish, don't you think? It's a request to someone to give you the power to achieve what you can't on your own.
A wish? No.
Yes, and I'm going to grant a wish called Geass to all the people everywhere. For the future of the entire world.
Lelouch, the price you're going to pay for using your Geass on them is a dear one.
The only ones who should kill are those prepared to be killed. Suzaku, you're going to be a hero now. The Messiah who saved the world from Emperor Lelouch V. Britannia, the enemy of the world. That's Zero.
If you know Code Geass and its music, what did you think of the analysis? Are there other things I left out? Other scenes using similar progressions? Are there any other tracks you want me to look at more closely? Leave a comment and let me know. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. This content takes a lot more time and effort to create than my video game content, so I really do appreciate the support for these videos. Thank you all so much for watching.